Hi, everyone. I want to thank everybody for being here this evening. We really appreciate you joining our second session of our expert speaker series, How to Be an Ally Effectively. My name's Cheryl DeVoe McDaniel, and I'm a founding member of the Anti-Racism District, Rotary District 7820. Sorry about that, a little tongue-tied. I'd really like to thank our speakers this evening for taking time out of their busy schedules to be with us and to have a conversation with us about how to be an ally effectively. Also, apologies go out to Dorico Simmons. We misspelled his name. We left out the N in Simmons on the original poster that went out, but thanks to an eagle-eye Rotarian who brought it to our attention, we were able to rectify it before this evening. This evening's topic, I know everybody probably has their own ideas and perspectives, but we ask that you listen really intently and respectfully to what our expert speakers have to say this evening. And now I think we'll go on with a few of our housekeeping items. You would have noticed just before we started that there would have been a revolving PowerPoint slide showing the bios of our speakers, our agenda for this evening, and some reminders about chat box etiquette. Although we appreciate everybody's input, there will be, we just want to let you know that there will be no live questions taken and asked directly to the speakers. They're going to be taken out of the chat box. And the chat box, Jason Doyle, who is our facilitator, is going to monitor the chat box. He's going to pull questions and ask them directly to the speakers. Don't worry if your question doesn't get asked here this evening, because what we're going to do is we capture everything, we're going to put everything in a Q&A format, and a link will be sent to you via email to that Q&A format. You'll also be able to access a recording of tonight's session. We would also ask your help in helping to complete a survey, which you should receive in a couple of days' time, anywhere between 24 and 48 hours. And it's really important. Your feedback's important to us because we really use it to help us prepare for our future segments that we do in our expert speaker series, one of which is going to take place in June. And then we're going to take a break for the summer, and then the rest will start up again in September. With regards to the Q&A format for the questions and the link, you should probably get that anywhere between 5 to 10 days. And now, without further ado, I'd like to pass the baton on to Trinda Ernst, who's going to tell you all about our speakers this evening.
Thank you, Cheryl. I can't tell you all about them, but you've got their bios. But I can tell you that Falami Jones is born and bred here in Nova Scotia. Famous father, Dr. Burnley Rocky Jones, to all of us. And she credits her dad with all the daily life lessons that have contributed deeply to the person she is today. He told Falami that if you see something wrong and you don't stand up for what is right, then you are a part of the problem. And she's written that being a trailblazer requires a resilience that I can't even read myself, is rooted in a thirst for change and a desire to expect better. She's brought that to the work she has done as an indigenous African Nova Scotia woman whose community dates back 400 years. She's worked with local and global communities on social justice and equity issues. She's been a practical nurse, a midwife. She's delivered a bunch of babies, over 100 apparently, between Canada and the Caribbean, and she has 3 of her own. I don't know how she has time to go back to law school, but she did. and she is contributing there on many committees, including the Schulich School of Law's African Nova Scotian Strategy Group, the Dow Law Student Society Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee, as well as the Health Association of African Canadians. We are so lucky that she can spare time before graduation, which I assume is in a few days or next month. Also with us tonight is Derico Simmons, and he is well known in Nova Scotia for being a fearless advocate for racialized and marginalized communities in Halifax. He is a sought-after presenter, particularly with youth. He's done numerous presentations to school students as well as post-secondary students and community organizations, not to mention New Canadians. So he is well placed. His topics focus mostly on systemic racism, white privilege, and allyship. So this is terrific for us. And I have fresh breaking news that wasn't in the bio that you all have access to. Just last week, he participated in the Black Canadian Summit. And that was a national discussion about solutions to the current Canadian social justice system, which we all know has a higher representation of Black and Indigenous folks than there should be. And more breaking news, he starts a new gig. So right now, he's the inaugural Director of Opportunity and Belonging at NSCAD, but next week, he starts a new role with the provincial government in the Office of Equity and Anti-Racism Initiatives. Boy, the talent pool here tonight, this is going to be our best session ever. Thank you so much, both of you. Take it away.
Is that up? Is that me up? Is that what's next? Okay, well, thank you and congratulations to Rico again on that phenomenal work that you've done and what's coming up. I just want to tell everybody I'm kind of working from 2 computers, so bear with me. My computer wasn't working, so we're gonna share screens and I'm gonna juggle between the 2. So I'm gonna try that now because I'm working off my iPad, which I don't normally. Screen, okay. Oh, wait, no, that didn't look like it worked. Screen, start. Okay, hold on now with me here. Okay, can you see the screen?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. So again, big thank you to the Rotary, the Systemic Racism Task Force, for organizing this event, but even importantly is all those that have shown up and taken time out, as we've been saying. I know many of us are zoomed out, so this is important work and great work, and so hopefully there's many more to come. This particular picture I chose, and I've used it in some other presentations. It was taken in 1968 out of Dalhousie's yearbook, and that's with my father, Dr. Burnley Rocky Jones, the late, and other young allies, as I like to say, and they are demonstrating with the Student Association to end war in Vietnam. So I thought that was fitting in terms of us thinking about allyship and not to forget that our young ones are watching. So here we go. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to try and break everything down as much as I can. And I've chosen to use PowerPoint only because I'm going to be going over some history. So anti-Black racism, in particular, I want us to think about our understanding of race, privilege, and our location. We often speak in the present because the harms are constant and they're fresh. But the history of the construction of race, when we think about anti-Black racism, is an important backdrop to our current context of systemic racism. So in my presentation, I really want to explore some of the notions behind race itself. To be clear, I am not a historian. That is not my area of study, nor am I an expert in race. What I am an expert in is the skin I've lived in, and being an African Nova Scotian woman and a mother. So that's the location that I'm coming from. So what is anti-Black racism? In order to think about this, we're going to try and think, as I was saying, a bit more around race and the meaning behind it, how it was formed. Until the 18th century, the word race and species were actually interchangeable. Between the late 18th century and the early 20th century, there was an intellectual movement known as the Enlightenment, which some of you may know, and that spawned the belief that humankind could be divided into distinct and unequal races. They attempted to scientifically validate a belief in racial difference, and a new thinking surfaced in the 20th century as eugenics. And in 1883, the term eugenics that was created came from the Latin word meaning, I should say, good in birth or noble in heredity. So racial hierarchies have long relied on assumptions that one, races are biologically distinct and differentiable by categories, and two, that these races differ in important physical, behavioral, and intellectual capacities. Dr. Samuel Morton collected human skulls as an example from around the world, and he believed he could judge racial intellectual capacity by measuring the brain. He argued for an evolutionary ladder of humankind that positioned Europeans at the top and Blacks at the bottom. If we look to Darwin's original survival of the fittest theory, that later informed eugenicists in arguing that the grades of intelligence are based off of one's physical phenotype. The racial categorization assigned individuals at birth with permanent racial differences, again, suggesting that Europeans' phenotype was superior with intelligence. And today, these racial differences are the foundations that regulate access to opportunities, such as schooling, places of residence, political power, and health outcomes. So I want you to think about your last conference, your last business meeting you attended, and who was there. How many of them were Black or racialized, or how few? When you look around, how often in these spaces are white folks the majority? I want you to ask yourself, who is your boss? You know, who's the CEO? Who's the director of your organization or your board? And now ask yourself, who cleans your floors at work? You know, who are our janitors at the hospitals? When you imagine directors or any kind of managerial position, how do you see that person? And I say also he, because there is a gender and a very real barrier there too. Now I want you to also sit and think a bit about where you live. Who are your neighbors? Who do your children play with? Who do you regularly have dinner with? We are creatures of comfort and habit. Power and privilege are the pillars to white comfort, and it is what maintains the normal space in which white people live and operate. And these are the pillars that also create boundaries to keep others out, or to, at best, make it very difficult to get in. I want you to think about how we get the opportunities to advance in our careers. We often use the term merit. But what does merit actually really mean? If you look up the definition, it's the quality of being particularly good or worthy, especially so as to deserve praise or reward. Well, then who is being praised and who's worthy? It doesn't seem that far-fetched to see how opportunity is less about merit and more about systemic and individual racism. George Brown College defined anti-Black racism as prejudice, attitudes, or discrimination that is directed at people of African descent and is rooted in their unique history and experiences of enslavement and colonialization. Anti-Black racism is deeply embedded in the Canadian institutions, policies, and practices. It's a point where it becomes a part of our system. As an example of this so-called merit, Ryerson University in 2019 recently did a study of diversity, looking across Canada at some of our larger provinces. Of the executive board members from 178 corporations, the study found that there were only 13 Black board executive members. That's 0.79%, while white members held a glaring 91%. Other companies, as Tim Hortons and Burger King, actually had no Black representation on the board or on the executive level. So these same devastating experiences and realities of systemic racism can also be found in our schools, our healthcare systems. And I think as we discuss a little bit further later this evening, I think we'll see a similar pattern in the way that even business happens. Race dominates our personal lives. It manifests itself in our speech, our dance, our relationships with neighbors, our friends. It determines our economic prospects. It permeates our politics, and it alters our health and our wellness. Institutions must examine and assess for systemic and inequality biases, and they need to be accountable and have mechanisms in place where we evaluate that progress. This particular picture was taken at my cafe, because I used to own a cafe, some years back with two of my friends or allies who've done some great work with Solidarity Halifax. But I want to draw a bit of attention in terms of how do we become an ally? And the first thing that I talk to people about, and I guess maybe I can flip back because we don't necessarily need a picture up, but let me see how to do that. Just one moment. I'm going to come back to you. Stop sharing. Okay, here we are. Is to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Difficult conversations aren't supposed to feel good. And that's sometimes the difficult work when you're doing ally work, is because we are venturing in the margins of places that we haven't gone before. We get caught up in worrying about the proper terms. And so we, instead of dealing with conversations or ideas within ourselves, we'd rather just kind of pack it over here. The second thing I would say is to self-check, recognizing, of course, where you speak from, your privilege, but importantly, in the things of why I wanted to bring history, is the history. There's a lot of conversation around ally work, and we talk about the things we need to do, which is important, but we need to know why we need to do them and where that came from. And that's an important part of those foundations of becoming your ally. Self-educate would be another part that I thought was really, really important to me when I do my ally work too, because I have my own privileges. One of the things, we got this amazing World Wide Web out there, and it's full of information. So do a little work first. So if you want to do that equity and diversity work, do a bit of history research and find some basis before you move on and start asking people, like, sometimes I'll get questions out of the random, which I enjoy. I enjoy some difficult dialogue, but I'm like, hold on a second. Did you do any work at all? You expected me to do all the work first. One of the things I've been thinking a lot about as I've left law school and now getting ready to practice law in a different career space, but is reach back and bring forward. I'm going to be in corporate law. It's not my area of law whatsoever. I didn't come from that privilege. I don't know it. but the people who have been there before can reach back and carry forward. So if you're in a position that is allowing you to have some kind of privilege or authority, call back to a colleague who's racialized and ask them to join in on your meeting. Give up your Rolodex, connect people with meaningful relationships to help build that. And I'm told my time is up. So thank you. We'll continue the dialogue anyway.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that, Flowing. We do have two good questions that have come up in the Q&A. They're actually for both presenters. So I'll ask you right now, and Dariko, if you want to chime in now or wait to after your presentation, by all means, whichever you're most comfortable with. So the first question is, can you share a moment where you felt support from an ally that was unexpected, or on the flip side of that, you would like to see more of?
Dariko, do you want to start?
I can answer the first one, and it may seem small to folks listening, but I mean, it actually happened during this session, and so it happens to me all the time. But my last name is Simons, and so it was pronounced Simmons twice, and I know it's a mistake, but it happens all the time, and so. A friend of mine, and who I consider as well an ally, Megan, she wrote in the chat, you can see your name in there, it's pronounced Simons. And so unexpected, but I felt supported, and because it's, and I know wholeheartedly that like when it does happen, like it's just because Simmons and Simons are just so close to each other. But it's my last name, and so I have to correct folks, and so I wasn't expecting her to sort of write it in. She's probably listening, like, "Oh, well, you're talking about that," but that was something that was unexpected for me, and so maybe I'll get into a little bit more because I don't want to take up sort of the ending and Falami to answer, but that was something that unexpected.
Awesome.
I'll piggyback off of Dariko, because what I'm hearing you say, which is not always having to be the person to speak up. And right. And so we get tired. And I give you my example of, if I thought about a few times being in board meetings, and previously I was in healthcare, now in law, but there was an incident where someone had made a comment that was pretty evidently racist. Everybody in the room knew. And normally it's the racialized person that says, well, hold on a minute, now wait, and they have to, put someone in check or say something like that didn't feel good, or let's rethink how we understand that term. But a good ally, if they knew and they're educated, can also do that talk. So they can stop and say, well, hold on a second, I don't know if that's correct. In the end of this particular example, nobody said anything, and I was tired. But after the meeting, a person came up and said, I recognize what happened. I'm really sorry you had to hear that. And I remember turning to her and saying, well, why didn't you say something then? So for her, she thought that was good enough that she told me, I'm sorry, I know that happened, like, I hear you. But what I needed her to do was to speak up in the moment and not have to have me to be her voice. So I'd answer with that.
I think that's a great answer. The other question that was asked, and again, it's to both of you, and something white allies say or do that they may think is supportive, but it can actually be hurtful or harmful.
I could start with that one. It was in my presentation, and then I took it out of how does one become an ally. One of the things that I think can be very frustrating for, at least, let me speak personally from at least a racialized person's space, is white fragility, white guilt. So I've also been in situations where that person's done some good work on themselves, and now they're kind of triggered by the difficult conversations that come up when you start to unpack issues of racism and you start to look at your history as a white person. But then the tears come and the harm comes and the hurt comes. And so we're in a dialogue and now you're crying, and now you're hurting because you don't feel good. Now I'm consoling you to make you feel better. And now the dialogue isn't happening, and I'm now using my little bit of energy that I have left to console you. And that doesn't mean not to feel, but I've thought about it much about that. And I think one of the ways to get around that would be, if not in the moment, to process with another white person who maybe has also done some of that work before you're ready to dig real deep and expect that, someone is going to console you. So I'd say that would be one of the things that just is like, okay, you got to get past that part.
I think that's a great example. Having it switch around, like, hold on a second, this is not about you, but anyway, makes 100% sense. Do you have a response to that, or do you?
I don't, more so maybe just a comment with that, because a person I saw in one of the pictures there with Falami, Jackie Barkley, good friend of mine. There's certain people that are kind of up here for me, and Jackie's one of those folks I consider ally, friend, and someone I get or take advice from. And one of the sort of comment to follow what Falami had mentioned was that Jackie has a really good stance on this and has been doing this work for quite some time. And it's that white folks have to figure out their stuff together. Because often in the sort of the presence of Black people discussing issues of race and racism, there are a lot of emotions, and then it becomes my job in that by default to sort of try and console the person. But I do encourage folks to either engage with Jackie or look up her work, because she is one of sort of one of the pioneers, I think, to my knowledge, in Halifax, who's been doing this work for a long time.
Awesome. Does she have a website by any chance that we could share with the group afterwards?
I will try to get online. They do have, so the organization, and you're right, because the organization that she founded and is kind of has a huge following now is Solidarity Halifax.
Okay.
So if you Google them, they're anti-capitalist, big union supporters, etc. But they do great work around unpacking white privilege.
Awesome. We'll include that in the email that we send out with the recording and the survey and stuff. We'll get that website so everyone can take a look at that if they like. So we're going to move on now to our second presenter, Dariko. So whenever you're ready there, you have the floor, sir.
Sure. So I have some things I'm going to speak to, and then time permitting, I have a diagram I'd like to go through. So some of this information, some of this conversation is going to make you uncomfortable. Embrace it, sit in it, reflect upon its presence, and ask yourself why. Allyship is not a finite destination. I have to repeat. Allyship is not a finite destination. There has often been a sense of arrival and accomplishment when one completes a cultural competence workshop. One cannot arrive to the competency of someone else's culture, ever. Allyship is not a finite destination. Rather, a lifelong journey of trying to get it right. And let me phrase it this way, is that as a Black male, I do not have the comfort and privilege to simply not engage or be engaged on issues of race and racism. Merely based on the color of my skin, whether I like it or not, for the rest of my life, I will be engaged because I'm Black. Being an ally means that you partake in the journey for the rest of your life as well. If we must endure it, as an effective ally, you must engage in anti-racism work for the duration of your lifetime. Racism is a historical legacy born out of the creation of white people in attempts to exude dominance and superiority. Being an ally is not simply calling yourself an ally and passively caring about the issues affecting the lives of persons of color. Caring is not enough. Collective action and active engagement is what is needed. So I have a few things that I'm going to go through, and then I'll try and get to the diagram. But I wrote down a few things in terms of being an effective ally. So be prepared to give up power or shift power. Often we can name statistics in many places and spaces. The folks who are holding the highest positions of power, and it is shifting, but the folks who are holding the highest positions of power are white men and white people. And to be an ally, that means you may have to move aside, you may have to make room, you may have to make space, you may have to reach down and pull some people up, but you will lose power. And that is part of the thing in terms of being an ally, is folks do not want to relinquish some of the power that they may hold in places and spaces. Performative allyship is not effective. There's many people that I know of, I can think of, who were very enraged, very upset when George Floyd happened, when George Floyd was murdered. And those same people are living their lives as if nothing has happened. Well, the Black folks do not have the luxury. And so performative allyship is not effective, and it's not needed. If you're not willing to or not wanting to engage for your lifetime, I would not call you an ally. We need people to continue this work, as I cannot change the color of my skin. It has to be an everyday affair. And so, as mentioned, I am Black every day, and I need you to be an ally every day, because racism happens every day. May not be to me every day, but it happens to folks who look like me every single day. Hold your own social circles accountable. This is one of the most difficult things to do. You may disrupt some relationships, but folks in your social circle may notice a shift, new education, new sort of way of thinking, and you have to hold those folks accountable when things do come up, when things are said, and when things are coming up in the news and there's debates happening. Holding your social circles accountable. Listen, reflect, and learn. And as I mentioned, friend and ally Megan Neves mentions respond with gratitude. And so if something, if you've done something that may be unintentional or maybe it was intentional, but I bring it to your attention, rather than being defensive and saying, well, I'm not racist, thank me for bringing it to your attention. That means I actually care about you enough to bring it to your attention. And responding with thank you, I'll do better next time. Thank you. I didn't realize that made you upset. Here's how I may be able to improve. Challenge and dismantle the same systems that you benefit from. As mentioned, places and spaces often are held, positions are held by white folks, and namely white men. And so challenging those same systems that you may have benefited from can be difficult, but it is needed. Own your privilege. So one of the main core things in terms of white privilege is that your skin color was not something that made your life difficult. Often we engage in conversations in relation to sort of class conversations. Well, I grew up poor as well, but that's not the conversation. Certainly, all folks could grow up poor, but the one difference is that your skin color was not one of those things that made your life difficult. That's the core that I'm trying to speak to. And give your support, not your sympathy. Because we need folks who are willing to support, who are willing to dig their heels in, and do the work alongside us. And although, sympathy is certainly needed at times, I would rather much more of your support than you wishing your sympathies to me, because I still have to live this life once I receive those sympathies and you go away. And so, I would employ folks to think about an alternative term to allyship. And so I'm interested in those who wish to conspire with me against racism. So I invite folks to think about the term co-conspirator rather than ally. I find that ally is somewhat passive. And if we're co-conspiring together against racism, that's the person that I want beside me, because we're conspiring to end it. One thing I'll leave with you is you've got to understand the interesting position answering this question puts me in. Racism is not something that I've created or Black people have created, yet We are asked to present the issue, defend our presentation of the issue, and then provide solutions for an issue that we didn't create. So I believe a more effective way of thinking about this is for white people to inquire with other white people on how they have been an effective ally to Black folks. And so I have one short diagram that I'm just going to bring up. If I get this right here. So, of course, I'm going to pay homage respects to Robert Wright. So I have asked his permission. So this concept is borrowed from Robert Wright. The other information is certainly original. But what I want folks to think about here is that over here on this spectrum is white privilege. People that may be sort of oblivious to what's happening may not even care. But as we move along the journey in allyship, there's an awakening, there's education, there's conversations, there's internal reflection. And as mentioned, you're going to have disrupted relationships. You're going to have people that are upset with you because this might be new to your friend circle. This might be new to your family. And so as you're turning the corner, you make it to this sort of place and space where it might feel lonely because you may have disrupted relationships. You may not be connected with your family and your friends in the same way, but you're also not necessarily connected to the Black, Indigenous, persons of color. You may not be connected there. And so it might seem a bit lonely here in this space. But as you continue to education, as you continue learning, growing, you might start speaking out yourself. You might start attending rallies. You might start educating folks in your immediate circle. And you know, just because you may land here or be accepted by folks in the Black, Indigenous, and persons of color community does not necessarily mean you've essentially arrived, because it's a lifelong journey where you may bounce back and forth, back and forth, back and forth throughout your whole life. But the point is to continue to try and get it right, to continue to try and get it right. I would much rather people continuing to try and get things right, continuing to move things than doing nothing at all. And so, you know, one thing that the last thing I'll say is that people have come before me and they have carried the baton as far as they could, as fast as they could, and they left it for other people to pick up. One certainly notable, Burnley Rocky Jones, carried the baton, many batons, as far as he could and as fast as he could, and left it for us to pick it up and continue to take it as far and as fast as we could. And so when I think back to my ancestry, I'm not here by mistake. People didn't give up. They carried it, and then someone picked it up and carried it and carried it. So it's our job to continue that legacy of grabbing the baton, and we're running as far and as fast as we can, and we're going to leave it in a better place for the next generation. And so allyship is not a finite destination, it's a lifelong journey. Thank you.
Awesome. You were bang on time wise. Like you were like, I was like, I don't even have to type anything. You got that right on. We have a really actually an awesome question that I think kind of fits really well with everything you were just saying there. So the question is allyship only a function of individuals or for individuals? Can an organization, for an example, Rotary, be an ally? And do you have any examples or could elaborate on what that would look like?
I think, of course, an organization can be an ally, because everyone individually has a sphere of influence, but then as a collective and then as an organization, you have a bigger sphere of influence. And so how can the Rotary advocate for certain things that we may recognize that particular groups are not getting? And so not just Rotary, but particular departments in government do it, particular nonprofit organizations do it, collective, like Solidarity Halifax, for example, does it all the time. And there were many organizations in relation to the fisheries dispute with the Indigenous communities who were using their sphere of influence and using their privilege and their organization to advocate for things for that particular community. So absolutely, organizations, businesses, departments can be allies. So it can be both. It can be individual, but also collective.
And I think we've seen that as part of the task force too. We've seen that curve that you showed where, having those difficult discussions and having to try to kind of go through and kind of feeling a little bit alone out there and trying to move it forward so that we can, get to that place that we need to be. Another question that we have is, can people of color in different races be allies to each other to, say, another race? And I think you spoke to that a little bit there, but I'll let you kind of expand on it. And Flomi, if you have any comments or comments on these, by all means, please jump in there.
Yes, I mean, I think that it's a quick yes for me, because there's so much inequity and disproportionality. And because I'm a Black male, doesn't mean that I can't as well advocate or be an ally to a Black woman, or be an ally or an advocate to Indigenous or any other person of color. It's about, for me, it's about advocacy, using your influence, and where it becomes sort of a bigger conversation for white folks is that we know and we understand in society there's white privilege. There's an entire conversation we can have about that, but society in its inception was not set up at all for persons of color to survive and thrive. And so thus, we now have a society that privileges a group of people, being white folks. And so often we do hear the term allyship more so for white people. And so absolutely, you can be an ally. I can be an ally to anyone else, but the conversation becomes more prominent and prevalent for white people to be allies because of white privilege and because of the historical injustice and how society was actually set up.
Awesome. Flo, do you have any comments there?
Yeah, and I just want to go back to the first question, then I might
Sure.
give you something for this one, because I think when we're thinking of the collective responsibility, something that I think the Rotary can do, but also other organizations, is hold each other's organization accountable. I mean, part of it is, is finding solutions, but you ever been held accountable for something that you shouldn't have been doing, or you needed a little bit more oomph? It's important to do that work. And I think also, like the Rotary too, is accessibility. There's so many people in your Rotary membership, and if you thought about the amount of access others could have to, whether it's law, policing and the justice system, et cetera, if people really utilize their power in that way, I think organizations could spread a lot further. Part of it too is even recognizing, I think, how do you do that? And maybe at a different point, or I'd hope that in your next series, you might think about breaking down some of those power structures and get some tangible examples of how we might do that, whether it's in our employment policies, and really thinking about how we're going to make that happen. And then just in terms of allyships too, I mean, we're in particular, me and Darika are talking about anti-Black racism, and that's one ism, if you would, but we all have our own different types of privilege. And I think that our allyship can, or co-conspire, I love that, Darika, that's awesome, in any form or fashion. So, for example, I'm female, and I think that I've had some amazing male feminists in my life that have done some great work in supporting me to making sure I have voice, to make room for me at tables where I might not have been, even just as a woman, let alone a Black woman. So I think we can also look at the intersections of how we show up at the table, be it woman, be it man, be it LGBTQ+, however you are and where you're at. There's rooms to make space for different conversations. So yeah, I'm gonna broaden the way that we think and a little bit less narrow.
Awesome. So we still have a couple more questions, and I'm going to open this up to everybody here on the panel. So all the members of the task force, and both to Darika and Flomi, if so anyone who would like to kind of chime in, by all means. But this is a great question. How do I appropriately engage friends in conversation about allyship without them feeling burdened with explaining this? I think this goes back to the comments that you guys made earlier there about, being the one that always has to live it and always has to explain it, stuff like that. How can they engage in that conversation, but without kind of putting that on you to be the one to have to explain it?
I think it's important to give, if you're looking to engage a friend of yours, you can give that person agency to answer the question, but say you don't need to answer this. Because people will ask me questions expecting me to answer the question, but even if I say I don't want to answer, will still want me to answer. And so if a friend of mine is looking for me to a white friend of mine is looking for me to answer a question, and they ask me and say, "Hey, Dorico, I'm wondering what you might think about this. You don't need to answer it," and I accept no as an answer, and I say no, then that can be the end of it. But there's sort of the expectation that the lone or the few Black people have to drop what they're doing to answer those questions. So sort of, I guess it's in terms of how you phrase it. What do you think about such and such? I understand that I'm asking this question from a privileged place, and you certainly do not need to answer it, but I'm not sure where to go. Maybe you could direct me to somewhere else, or you don't have to answer it.
I would also add, thank you, Dorico, for that. Thinking a bit about intention, and some of the things that I was trying to pull out in the presentation is, who are your neighbors? Where are your friends? How do you socialize? Because a lot of these conversations, and that was what was really beautiful about the cafe at points in time, was how we dialogue, how we interact with each other. If we're sitting having coffee and you're actually truly interested in who I am as a woman, as a mother, you're going to get to know the parts of me that experiences life as a Black woman in the soul. So I think, invite people to your social circles, sit with them, learn, be human with each other, and be intentional about it. And that doesn't mean just because you've got a Black person that's at work talking about, let me bring you home for dinner, but be intentional about it. I'll come to dinner, I'm sure Drake will come to dinner. There's ways in which we can build our friendships and have meaningful relationships. And I think that's one of the best ways that we can learn. Anyway, I think that's fine.
I think that really, and David, I'll let you jump in just momentarily there. I have another question that kind of came up that.
Take your time, Jason. Take your time.
Perfect. So this question, and I think it leads into your answer, Flomie, is that holding your social circles accountable, is there a potential price to be paid for that? Do you have a social circle because people don't share your views on racial, or do you leave a social circle, I should say, sorry, because people don't share your views on racial issues? I think that's kind of leads to exactly what you were saying there, and I'll welcome any answers anyone has there.
I would say, yeah, it comes with a cost, or it comes with a price, depending on your social circle. If you're in a social circle that you're the person who raises the issues around race and racism, and the person or people become hostile, then that might not be the social circle for you. Because, as mentioned, there will be disrupted relationships along the way. And, is the price to pay worth the change in the lives that you could save? Staying in that social circle to try and educate those folks. So there absolutely could be a price to pay if you're viewing it as a price to pay. Yeah, anyway, I don't want to ramble. I'll leave it there. It's a good question.
So David, let's flip it over to you there. You have a comment you want to make?
Thank you very much, Jason. Do you want me to do the closing remarks in terms of the two wonderful presenters?
We have actually one more really good question. I thought you might have had a comment on the last question there.
No, but I'll make a few comments in my closing remarks.
Okay, perfect. That works for me too. So this is actually a really good question too that's come up in the chat, is what are some of the overarching themes that come up with youth when engaging them in this conversation? So that's a little bit different of, someone like all of us here who've kind of gone through some different things, but youth have a different perspective possibly at this. So I'll throw this out to you guys, some of the themes that youth may be dealing with.
Fear, and it depends specifically which sort of group of youth you're talking about. You're talking about a group of white youth versus a group of Black youth, or a mixed sort of group of different folks. But I would say generally fear. There's fear on both sides in terms of talking about race and racism, and fear and anxiety for persons of color, because with having these conversations, it could mean, it could mean loss of employment. It could mean, you might have to watch your back. It could mean, this information could get to the authorities. And, I would say that also sort of looking for support. Young people are they're looking for support, and they need to be supported. And so, I'll be short. I'll say fear, anxiety, and support.
I think that I don't think it's only the youth that feel that fear there. I think that fear is a real thing right across the board, because people don't want to find out that maybe they wronged somebody. Maybe what they were doing or the privileges that they enjoy actually hurt people. They don't want to address that or look at that, I'm a good person. I don't do anything that hurts anybody, but you might be benefit from that.
The one thing I just also want to add in as a theme is validation. And so if you are talking to a group of Black youth, in my experience, folks felt validated that, well, you had that experience, and you had that experience too. And so there is some validation that comes with it, depending on which group of youth we're talking about.
I think that's a really good point too, that each group is different. It's not an overarching, everyone feels the exact same thing. I think that's an important thing that we all have to kind of realize, that everyone has a different perspective and bring something different to the table. Philomena, do you have any comments you want to make on that?
No, really, I think Dorico, and he has so much experience with youth, so I really appreciate the knowledge. The only thing that kind of comes to mind for me, even if I think about my own young people in this home, is access and opportunity. A lot of times that's the biggest divide. But culturally, it's just such different realities. And if we were to think about it in terms of allyship that way, and how maybe young white youth can engage with younger Black children or youth, it would be to somehow find ways to cross over some of those cultural barriers, because there is such a difference in opportunity and access. So I think if I thought about that, that's probably one of the bigger barriers anyway.
Awesome. Thank you for your comments. David, I'll turn it over to you for your closing comments and knowledge on that front.
Thank you very much, Jason. Can you hear me okay? Excellent, excellent. Well, I'd like to first of all say something about the two speakers personally. Falame, first of all, Falame, I know your family well. The last time I met your father was at the QEH. We were both there for different purposes. And we connected and had a discussion. And that was shortly before he died. I have great respect for your father and for your family generally, and indeed for you, because you are highly regarded by my wife, who knows your work well, and her name is Anne Devine. In terms of Dorico, I'd like to say I know you personally and know of your work because we have worked together, and I have enormous respect and admiration for you. And so with those two initial comments about both speakers personally, whose presentations, by the way, were excellent, I wish to make the following comments. First of all, in respect of Falame, I loved your comments about allyship being essentially the art of getting comfortable being uncomfortable. I loved the point you made about self-checking your privilege and your history. I loved your comments about allies needing to be self-educating. And I loved your comments about reaching back and carrying forward, giving others a hand up, a helping hand up the ladder of this greasy pole, which we have to navigate as individuals who are non-white. In respect of Dorico, I'd like to say the following. You made the comment that allyship is not a finite destination, it's lifelong. You talked about be prepared as an ally to give up your power, your privilege. You talked about you need to be an ally every day, not just for the moment. You talked about hold your social groups accountable. You talked about challenging and dismantling the same systems you as allies benefit from. In other words, own your own privilege. And you talked about giving your support and action, not your sympathy, to those who are non-white. You also made a rather interesting comment about changing the term allyship to co-conspirator. May I suggest, as an ally of you and Falame, and as somebody that's had decades of experience in this field of combating the very issues that both yourself and Falame are so dedicated to combating, I would suggest you need to be slightly careful with the term for the following reason. Co-conspirator, the term conspirator, suggests something slightly negative, not quite right, not quite expected, not quite right, essentially. Allyship should be about and is about affirmation. It's about upholding rights taken from those who essentially have hitherto been dispossessed of those rights. It is normal, not negative. It is affirmative, not something that you need to be furtive about, apologetic about. So my suggestion is for you and for Falame is to build allyship into the realm of what you and Falame wish it to be, not to use the alternative term co-conspirator, because that, in my view, my humble view, will undermine the very purpose that you and Falame and myself and our task force are so dedicated to make sure is amended. Thank you very much, Jason. I'm ended.
Thank you very much. I just want to thank everyone for coming out and taking time out of your busy schedules to join us. We are recording this event and we will be sending that out. And if anyone has any questions or concerns, please by all means let us know, and we'll get those questions answered as best we can and get it out to everybody else. Do any of the other panelists have anything else to say before we wrap it up completely?
No, thank you. I would say that just thank you for inviting me alongside Falame to share some of our thoughts, and thank you as well to everybody in the comments. I really appreciate those sentiments, and I respectfully would disagree with you, David.
I'm sure you would, Dorico, but never mind.
And I love that. That's the best way to go out, right? We got a good debate. What's the point?
Exactly.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. It was a great session. I look forward to hearing more of your work.
Take care.
Dorico, you're awesome.
Give my love to your family, Falame, please.
I shall. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Great session, Jason. Well done.
Thank you.